I'm Graham Jones and welcome to Channel KT4, broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube. You can join in by sending in questions during the show. Just press the comments button on the screen. Don't forget to click the like or share buttons. If you're watching on YouTube, please click to subscribe to Channel KT4. It gives me great pleasure to welcome a really interesting young man who's going to tell us all about an organization called Citizen Zoo. So give a warm welcome, please, to Elliot Newton. Hello, Elliot.
Hello, Graham. Thank you for having me here on your show today.
It's an absolute delight to be here. And as I can see that you're the non-executive director at Citizen Zoo. You're on a mission to rewild our future. What exactly does that mean, Elliot?
It's a very good question. So rewilding is an interesting term. It's quite a new term. It hasn't really got any accepted definitions just yet. But to me, it means two very important things. And one is reconnecting people to nature, and especially in an urban environment. We want people to have a connection with the natural world around us, and that can bring a whole wealth of public, sort of personal and physical well-being. And then secondly, rewilding our landscapes. So our land, well, the UK's landscape is rated 189th on the planet when it comes to our biodiversity intactness. So we've got a massively impoverished biodiversity. We're lacking a lot of the species that should potentially be here, making these. The one way I like to explain it is imagine nature being one amazing puzzle, and over hundreds and thousands of years, we've been plucking pieces out of this puzzle. Now this puzzle is very much degraded. So something I would like to do through either human actions or be able to reintroducing species is trying to make that puzzle back into the beautiful picture it should be displaying, and not sort of the rather degraded sort of shaky puzzle that we currently have. And yeah, and then Citizen Zoo is a project, an organization that I helped to found a few years ago after following my master's at Imperial. And yeah, it's all about trying to achieve those aims in using community action to do that. And now I've moved on a little bit. I'm still part of Citizen Zoo, but still as a volunteer. But now I actually work for Kingston Council as their biodiversity officer, which is a quite new, exciting role that I'm also involved with at the moment.
Do you know something? Actually, Elliot, I could even go as far as to say that sounds like a bit of a grown-up job you've got there now.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing job. It's a new job to Kingston Council. And my job is to try and create a biodiversity strategy for the borough and how we can try. I really want Kingston, well, because I know you're slightly outside the borough boundary, but very much important to the sort of holistic view when we view landscapes. But I really want the area to be a leading borough leading area when it comes to how we try and improve our environment and engage people within that environment.
Okay. Now, Elliot, I know now you're at Kingston Council and working for them. So, but how is the Citizen Zoo funded? Is there anything members of the public can do to help, or are you, the Borough Council, funding the whole thing?
So Citizen Zoo is very much it's what we call a community interest company. So it's not quite a charity. So I could talk about this for a long time, but in short, I think charity is really, really important for conservation, but it can, and grant writing and stuff like that. But it can be quite debilitating because, to my mind, the most important job on the planet is trying to improve the planet and save the planet for future generations and the species that is involved in climate change and ecological breakdown are some of the biggest challenges that we've ever faced as a species, as a planet. We're currently what we call the sixth mass extinction in our sort of 4 billion year history on the planet. So these are really significant challenges, and charity is definitely a really good way of trying to improve and support projects. But also, I think we also need to find other mechanisms in which we can support conservation projects. But how Citizen Zoo is funded, to sort of answer your question, we try and sort of diversify our sort of funding streams. So one way is writing project applications to granting bodies who provide funding, and one way is also through charitable activities like crowdfunders. So we currently have a crowdfunder live to try and help bring water voles back to the catchment, which is something we might be able to talk about.
Yeah, we will talk about that, of course. But I'm interested at the moment because I'm looking at the wonderful, by the way, Citizen Zoo website, which has got, by the way, an incredible video that was funded by Citizen Zoo. which is really worth. I'll really give a shout out for it and say to anybody, if you want to have a look at the Hogsmill River in all its glory, then have a look at that video. Unfortunately, due to a technology issue here from me, I can't bring you a bit of that video. That's really a shame. However, you do a lot of work with schools in your rewinding club. I've got a little picture here, but could you tell me a little bit more about this initiative, Elliot?
Yeah, so as I said, rewilding is all about trying to reconnect people to nature. And one really good way of doing that is by starting with our children. So going into schools and doing various nature talks and stuff. And then when you get the children involved, then they can be good sort of ways to influence parents' that behavior as well. Because if the children are saying, I love nature and I want to get outside more, and what can we do to protect our local environment, that might get the parents thinking about it. So we try and engage as much with the local schools as we possibly can. And then further to that is we have lots of volunteering activities. So across Kingston, we've got about 12 nature reserves and lots of other green spaces. And there's lots of organisations, not just Citizen Zoo, but lots of other organisations that do lots of volunteering activities and friends groups, which are local people coming out to make our green spaces better for everyone. And so there's we really believe in the power of people and grassroots action. And so being able to mobilise and facilitate and catalyse local volunteering activities is something we very much believe in and want to help push forward further.
I think that's really good. And the other initiative, which really I took a look at it and thought, how clever is this initiative for corporate days, and a thing called a wild lunch, where Citizen Zoo goes into the corporate environment, goes for an hour, does a presentation on various subjects and projects that you're doing, and then you can invite them out to go and spend a day by the river or out in the wetlands or somewhere else like that. Here's a picture. So tell me a little bit more about these corporate days, Elliot.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's another way in which we're trying to rewild our organisations and the people within that. So as I said, charity funding can be a little bit restricted in how we sort of fund these big conservation projects. And the way we really want to conservation generally is how we can engage with sort of the private sector and try and maybe some of the money there to try and bring that into really important conservation projects, and not just the money but also the staff that those organisations represent. So what we want to do is offer a range of different days and activities in which people can come out and it's really good for people just to go out and learn about nature, and team building exercises that go on with doing a conservation task. And then also being able to achieve some really important proactive conservation at the same time. And so this is not just a conservation activity, but almost an awareness raising and almost a team building. And, when people are outside of the office and becoming close teams, especially at the moment when people might not be in office and working from home, we want to offer sort of bespoke days in which you can have 6 people who would normally be not being in as regular contact as they would be normally, and they can go outside and to do a conservation task. And it's a great way to spend a day, and also a great way to bring people together in a COVID compliant way.
Oh, it sounds absolutely marvelous. I'm really into that. I think it's a great initiative. But I'm also interested in the work that's happening on the Hogsmill and all the various projects that you've got. I'm particularly interested because I'm really fortunate. The bottom of my garden is actually the Hogsmill River. So I spend a lot of time sat on the bank down there, having a cup of coffee and a bit of lunch and things like that. So it's a wonderful place. And it's just, I sit and wonder and look at all the wildlife that's right on my doorstep. And I just find it, stimulating and just a wonderful thing to look at kingfishers and egrets and we've got graylings, we've got chub, we've got barbel. It's marvelous. Sorry, I'm going on too much now. So you tell me something about some of these projects that you're doing, Elliot.
Yeah, well, great. Well, I think, as you say, we're so lucky as a local community and local people to have the Hogsmill on our doorstep. And at the end of your garden, what an amazing place to have it. That really is. I'm very jealous. But yeah, so the Hogsmill is a 9.9 kilometre stream. It rises in Epsom and follows through by Epsom and down through the sort of spine of Kingston and enters the Thames just by underneath Clapham Bridge, which is the oldest working bridge in London, apparently. But it's a really important river. One thing to know about the Hogsmill, it's what we call a chalk-fed stream. So it rises in a chalk bed. So the aquifers that supply the river percolate through chalk rock. And that makes it a very rare habitat in its own right. So we've only got about 200 chalk streams on the planet. So in itself, the river is a really special habitat and a rare habitat to have right on our doorstep. And it is an amazing wildlife corridor. As you say, it supports so many species, from fish to birds to bats to small mammals to even larger mammals like deer. So it's a really important ecological feature that is, really, really, really special, not just to the people, but the wildlife that's around us. That's a really important function. And there's lots of ways in which we can support it and fix it. So there's loads of charities that do lots of great stuff. For example, South East Rivers Trust have been knocking out all the weirs along the Hogsmill to make it more accessible for fish to go up and down. There's another organisation called the Lure Moles, and they do volunteering days on various areas on the tributaries. And Citizens Zoo also run conservation days where you can go out and do all sorts of elements, especially in the summertime that just passed. We weren't able to organise the big volunteering events that you would normally see in the summer due to obviously social distancing guidelines and making sure we're conforming to public health guidance. But one thing in the summer that we really like to do in a normal world is pull out Himalayan Balsam, which is an invasive species. So there's lots of sort of ways by removing invasive species, creating habitat, we can make it a better environment for everyone.
Actually, the Himalayan balsam is a very interesting subject, because actually on the other side, on the bank of where I am and just further upstream this year, because there hasn't been any balsam bashing, it's all grown. And I've been thinking I should get my waders on and get over there and rip it all out, because it is invasive, and it's I think it's just getting involved and changing the ecosystem around there on the bank, I believe. I think I'm right in saying that. The other thing I wanted to say, you mentioned pipistrelles and bats, but pipistrelles. One of the most wonderful things here is that as dusk is appearing, the pipistrelles appear above the river. And, because of the way that they communicate, they do this wonderful dance like this, in perfect synchronization. And it's just an incredible thing to see. The other bit you mentioned was about the river rising at Ewell. And just for those that may not know it, you can walk from Ewell to the tributary at the Thames at Kingston. And I think about 75% of it is along the river. And it's the most incredible walk. What I do, don't tell anybody this, but I take the walk and I get down to the river, and there's a lovely pub near the bridge at Kingston upon Thames. And then I phone up my wife and ask her to come and collect me from work. So she picks me up and we have a drink and then we come home. Anyway, I'm digressing. I'm interested also in the work that you've been doing about reintroducing water voles to the Hogsmill. Now, you've got to educate me here, because I don't know a great deal about water voles. There are two types. So there's a water vole, and is there a natural vole as well?
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting thing. A lot of people might have heard of water voles, but there's a lot of confusion about what they are. So just to help you with that, so in the UK, we've actually got 4 species of vole. One's a short-tailed vole, one's a bank vole, one's an Orkney vole, which only find on the Orkney Islands. Then we have our water voles. Water voles are the biggest of all our vole species, quite considerably larger than the other voles. But they have the unfortunate title of our most fastest declining UK native mammal. So we've lost about 94%, and that's probably an under reflection of the true demise. But we are seeing a really sharp drop in these amazing species, which has ramifications for the wider environment. Not just it's sad to lose a species, but every species has a sort of role to play, a job to play in the ecosystem. And once you lose it, that leaves a gap, and that role is no longer being done anymore. So it does degrade the functionality of the ecosystem. So we've got 4 species of vole, but the water vole is the most endangered one in the UK. And we used to have them along the Hogsmill. If you went back to about 1851, when Millet was painting Ophelia, which do you know about the, before I talk about Malay, do you know about Malay and Ophelia's painting? And
yes, I do. It's kind of like about 100 meters downstream from where my little cottage is, from where we particularly live. Can I just tell you a little story about the about Ophelia? My wife was doing an art installation project at she's a learning resources manager in a technology academy, and they were doing this kind of like art project. So my wife crazily got herself dressed in a long white dress, and we walked downstream by about 100 meters near to where the painting was reputedly taken, and she lay herself in the river and adopted the pose of Ophelia. But
wow.
What she did to make it current to today, she wore a face mask, and instead of holding flowers, she had a hand sanitizer. It's a very interesting. I haven't got the picture here to show you, but it's very good. So yes, I do know about that as well. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, what a fantastic interpretation. But I really think the Malay painting is such a, well, apparently out of the Tate, it's the most sold postcard. So it really is a famous painting. And to have that painted on our river, or the background at least, is a truly amazing asset. And when Malay was actually painting that painting, the reason why I bring this up is in the original drawing, or the original background painting, he included a water vole. But when he took that to his pre-Raphaelite brotherhood, they didn't really know what it was. They thought it was like a dog or a cat or a rat or something. So they asked him to remove it. And so I think there was a bit of an argument at the time. So he had to unfortunately remove the water vole from the painting. But if you actually get the original canvas and take it out of the frame and look at the edge of the canvas, apparently there's all these little sketches of water voles. So they've got a really important place in our sort of social history. And then obviously at that time, the river was teeming with water voles. And even if you go back 30 years, a lot of the volunteers who are involved in our water vole project remember going down to the Hogsmill and throwing bread into the water and feeding these water voles who would just be looking up to them with their children. And this is something we've lost now. It's very recent local extinction. We think the last record of water voles was in the sort of 2014 region. So it's not like we're trying to bring back mammoths to Kingston. This is a very recent extinction event that we think we can reverse with community action, which is a really positive story, we feel.
Yeah. Well, whilst you were telling the story then about the vole in the Ophelia painting from Millet, I was kind of thinking, I've looked at that painting so many times. I can't remember ever seeing a water vole. I'm glad you told me that it was removed. Right now, alongside so how do you get to reintroduce them? Is there a special type of habitat you need to create for it? You don't just go and pick a load of voles and chuck them in the river, do you?
No, absolutely. We have to be very considered, and we have to be very thoughtful and considered, and sort of really take a strategic approach when we do anything like this, because it's nothing to be done lightly. Because obviously, if you're putting a water vole back into an area which it became extinct, and you don't address the factors why it became extinct in the first place, you're almost likely releasing these creatures into a world of doom, which is no good. So what we've done over the course of the last sort of year or so, we've trained 60 volunteers, and we've walked the length of the Hogsmill and its tributaries, and we've put it into 100-meter sections. And we've got each of the volunteers to sort of look at the river as if they were looking at it from a water vole's perspective, and trying to work out, is there enough food for me to eat here? Is there enough places for me to burrow? And then using that sort of scoring system that we use, we've then used a traffic light sort of approach. So we've got areas of green, amber, and red, which are reflective of the good areas of habitat, the not so good areas, and then the bits that just aren't suitable at all. But now we have this really good map of the river, showing where there are suitable areas to release them into. So that was a really good first bit of work that we did to try and look at the feasibility of actually getting these creatures back onto the river. And surprisingly, we've actually got quite a lot of good bits of habitat that they can eat here. So water voles can eat about 227 different types of plant. So they've got quite a diverse diet. So that is quite favourable to us, because they are reasonably adaptable if there's enough plants there for them to eat. And then there's some other elements we had to do, which include surveying for what we call American mink, which is the biggest problem for water voles. because these are a species that were brought in and most notably in the 80s when they were very sadly farmed for fur coats. Animal welfare activists, with good intentions, I'm sure, broke into the farms and released them to try and save them from being put to slaughter for these coats. But unfortunately, by having these new species in the landscape, an American species that our water voles and our birds and other creatures had never experienced before, they had no evolutionary adaptations to sort of defend themselves against them. So once you have these American mink in the landscape, they absolutely devastate our water vole populations and our breeding bird populations that sort of nest on the banks. So we've had to be monitoring using these big rafts that you might see. If you walk over Clapham Bridge in Kingston Town Centre and look into the river there, you'll see one of our rafts floating there, because that's the first one that we've got. We've got 10 deployed across the catchment, and we're monitoring these on a weekly basis, looking for footprints to see if they're here. And if they are here, we'll then hopefully, we're working with the British Wildlife Centre. Rather than killing them, we'll try and take them over to the British Wildlife Centre, which isn't too far away, and they'll hold them in captivity there, and they can live out the rest of their days there. But these are the two big things we've had to do in preparation for even considering a water vole release. And now we're in the process of raising money, and then we'll be putting an order in to order about 200 water voles, which will then release hopefully at some point in the not too far distant future.
Now you have got, as you mentioned, money. You have got a crowdfunding site. Is it with Aviva? I think is that the one?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's actually not entirely easy to get registered on these systems. So Aviva actually offer their own crowdfunding platform that you have to apply to do. So it was quite a lengthy application process, and they sort of look at the project and see if it's appropriate for them to fund in terms of the ethos and the values behind it. And luckily, they deemed our project to be sort of community-led and improving the environment, so they gave it all the thumbs up, which was great. And now we went into sort of a 5-week period in which we've got to try and raise the finances to try and order our water voles, which is quite an interesting order to place. But we've got exactly the right guy on the case, who's the UK's leading water vole breeder, who's actually based in Devon. So we've now in quite an intense period of trying to raise the capital funds to sort of purchase these water voles.
I could just imagine going into the pet shop and saying, "Can I have 350 water voles, please?"
Yeah, I'm sure you get some funny looks.
I'm sure you would. Now, also in the crowdfunding, I want you to tell me something about this. We've got the Water Vole Guardian Certificate, Elliot. There it is. Can you tell me something about that?
Yeah, great. So we did quite a lot of research into our crowdfunding platform before we launched it. And what they said a good way to do it is have various sets of, rewards almost. If you're kind enough to donate to the project, what can we give you back in return for your kind donation? And so we've got a sort of a tiered sort of list of various rewards. And if you were to give us £10, which would be a very kind donation, would help towards the funds, we would then we have to make sure because of the nature of crowdfunding, you have to reach a target for these rewards to become to fruition. But if you reach a target and you've donated £10, we'll then send you a certificate saying you're a water vole sort of champion, and you'll get your name on that. And then you can prove that you were part of the team, the local inspired people, and who are inspirationally bringing back water voles. And then the system goes up as you go down, and the rewards sort of differ as you go up, with COVID face coverings and T-shirts, and the higher ones even get sort of guided tours around the Hogsmill and stuff. So yeah, hopefully it was our sort of attempt to try and make the campaign as successful as possible.
Oh, it sounds absolutely amazing. Now, finally, I've got 2 questions for you. The first one is, how can people get even more involved as volunteers? That would be an interesting question to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. So by no means is this a water vole project just about money. If anything, that is to my mind, the most important part of this water vole project is the community that is leading it. So this is what makes this water vole project and this conservation project pretty different to most conservation projects that have taken place in the UK. And the fact being that this is led by local people who are really helping to come together and sort of demonstrating what people can do when they come together and put their minds together. So there's lots of ways in which you can get involved with this project, where the name comes from. So one way is, I mentioned those sort of mammal rafts that we have placed. We've got 10 of them placed across the catchment, and we've got a rota, and you can go over and get your name on the rota, and then every few weeks or so you can pop down on your on a walk, a nice walk, as you say, because the Hogsmill features some amazing walks. And you can go down and check the raft. And what you do, you open the raft up and you look at the clay bed and you take a photo of it if there's some prints. And then we try and identify the prints that are there. So this isn't just looking for things like mink, it's lots of other things. So we're trying to use that as a really good way of trying to survey the environment that we have. Also, there's lots of community engagement tasks you can get involved with. And just any way in which we can try and raise the profile of these amazing creatures is a good way to go.
Well, when I spoke to about a month or so ago, I spoke to Kim, who is one of the volunteers, and Kim Speckett, and she told me all about the various volunteer organisations, and I did put all those organisations on my Facebook page for Channel KT4. So if people want to go and check that out, they could possibly do that. Elliot, I don't know where the time has gone, but it's we really have run out of time. So thank you for popping into my virtual studio today. It's been fascinating to hear all about the fantastic work that you doing in your new job, your grown-up job, and what Citizen Zoo is up to. And I look forward to following all these projects with much interest in the future. And so once again, Elliot, just a really big thank you for coming in today. It's much, much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. This is Graham Jones broadcasting on Channel KT4. Join me next time. And until then, stay safe and stay alert.